As a lot of you guys probably already know, I'm a big fan of beaver trapping and just beavers in general. I think that they're pretty cool. And I also like history. So if either one of those two things interest you, this video might be just the thing for you. So it's pretty common knowledge that in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and everyone talks about how Columbus was such a big part in the discovery of America and its upbuilding and all that good stuff. But what if I told you that a simple rodent, just a beaver, had more to do with the development of the American continent than any one man ever did? Stay tuned and you'll get to hear a little bit about that. But before we get into it too much, we're going to go ahead and we're going to talk about our sponsor for this episode. We manufacture our own line of baits and lures that you can get off of our various trusted retailers. Or if you're somewhere farther away from where we're located, you can get them online at murrayslures.com. Mike's a good guy, and they sell all kinds of different trapping supplies besides just the stuff that we create. They sell traps, parts, stakes, tools, and other companies' bait and lures. So if you want to support us, you can go to murrayslures.com and pick up some of the stuff that we make. Thanks to Mike for everything that they do for us, and let's get back to the video. Before we get too deep into the video, I just want to start off by saying thanks for watching. And if you do end up buying anything from Mike or any of our other vendors, we really appreciate that. One other thing I'd like to mention is I am a redneck with a high school diploma, and that is as far as my education goes. And I am not bilingual. I do not speak other languages. And a lot of the people that we are going to be referencing in this video are going to be either from the French descent or Spanish descent. And I am not good with those other countries' names. So I'm going to probably pronounce some of these names wrong, but if I am able to, I will find the correct pronunciation and I will put them somewhere here. I don't know, you'll see it somewhere. It all kind of started back in 1534 when a French explorer named
Jacques Cartier
was looking for the Northwest Passage, which is a passage to the Orient. That was kind of a thing that a lot of people from France and Britain were trying to find back in the day, kind of like a route to get to India, to the other side of the world faster. But what he actually ended up finding, he was in the St. Lawrence River, and he discovered that it was polluted with fur. I mean, anything that you could think of. And fur was a very, very hot item back, that's been over 500 years ago. He ended up taking back a lot of the fur that they found to France with them. And he wasn't the first person who had traded with the Indians, but whenever they had discovered that part of America was just loaded with fur, it kind of sparked a boom where a whole bunch of immigrants came over because the fur was worth so much money back then. It was kind of like the equivalent to the gold rush. It was a way that anyone, as long as you could afford some traps, you could go over there and you could make a lot of money, your own little personal fortune.
Jacques Cartier,
like I had mentioned, he wasn't the first person who traded with the Indians, but he was the first documented person to do it on a very, very large scale. He ended up naming the place they kind of set up their fur post at New France. 1550s kind of whenever the beaver boom started heavy, after a whole bunch of people kind of moved in and got started. Rum was kind of the major trading item at the time. Native Americans hadn't quite figured out distillation yet, and while most Native Americans were super conservative with their trades, a lot of settlers figured out that there were specific tribes who they would drink in excess, and they would trade barrels and barrels of rum with them for tons and tons of fur. The rum and alcohol actually ended up having a pretty bad effect on a lot of those tribes. The younger members, like I had mentioned, would drink in excess, and it would kind of create falling outs within the tribes where the younger members wouldn't listen to the older members. It also kind of stemmed a lot of the conflicts that the tribes had between each other and some of the conflicts that they had with the various settlements. It even affected such minute things as the amount of labor that tribes were getting done, leading to smaller harvests and crops. One thing that was pretty bad that a lot of settlers and trappers would do, and fur traders, is they would give rum to the Indians on credit. which created, massive debts that most tribes either took years and years to pay off, or they just never did. Even with the terrible credit and everything, the Indians kept trading for it though, because it was something that they really, really liked. And as I mentioned, they hadn't found out the technique to distillation yet. Another very important French explorer was de Champlain, or at least I think that's how you say his name. He fell in love with New France from the first time that he saw it, and actually on his third excursion through, he founded the city of Quebec in the year of 1608. He also expanded north of the St. Lawrence River, which helped to build up the fur trade in that area of the country and to bring more money back into France. After all the success that de Champlain had after he went back to France, droves of his countrymen ended up flocking to America to make money on the fur trade. It was such a big deal back then. It was a way that anyone could become rich. Only a year later, in 1609, an Englishman named Henry Hudson, which that name may very well sound familiar to you guys, and especially if you're in the fur industry or if you live in Canada. Henry Hudson was employed by a Dutch trading company, and he reached the harbor of what's modern day New York. He was en route looking for another way to get to India. The river that he entered into had a taste of salt, so he assumed that river led to a connecting body which would take him to the Pacific Ocean. He went up that river to what is now current day Albany. Once he made it to Albany, he wasn't able to go any farther because the stream just wasn't quite large enough for their boat. Along the banks of that stream, Indians were watching this, as they called this large bird with huge white wings, or his ship, to catch a glimpse of the spectacle and to see what was going on. Hudson ended up trading with those same Indians and took a shipload of fur back to Holland, where he was from. He actually ended up being kind of dissatisfied with the trip because, his whole purpose was to find a passage to India, but at least it wasn't a total loss. The Dutch were actually quite pleased with the journey because he brought back all that fur, and they ended up sending another expedition to trade with the friendly Indians, and it ended up becoming a very successful trading outpost. That trading post ended up becoming so successful that a city was formed there, and it was called New Amsterdam. And that same city is now what we know as current-day New York City. The fur trade in New York grew so great because they have deep harbors, and it made it easy for the Dutch to get their ships in and out, that they ended up buying all of Manhattan Island from the natives for $24, which is right around $7,100 in today's currency. So let's just say they got it for the steal of the century. But the fur trade helped establish, if not totally on its own, one of the largest cities in the world. In 1610, Hudson once again crossed the Atlantic looking for another passage to India. He went through the Hudson Strait into a large body of water which ended up being named in his honor, which is the current day Hudson Bay. As soon as they landed there, the Brits kind of figured out that they had found a very special area. The Hudson Bay was loaded with fur, especially beaver. And as soon as word made it back to England that they had found this large body of water overflowing with fur, just like it happened in France, England, whole families quit their jobs, sold everything that they owned, and jumped on a ship to move to this new land where they could make all this money. The people who ended up settling in that area dealt with constant dangers. They weren't always guaranteed supplies or food, and a lot of the natives in that region were very hostile. They weren't happy that all these people were moving in and over-harvesting their resources. The French and the British didn't make the situation any better on anyone to begin with, because they had constant border disputes between Canada and America, and trying to claim up as much trapping land for themselves as possible, keeping tensions high. There were many battles, small and large, that were fought on these borders, trying to take as much land for one or the other as possible. Both countries ended up setting up multiple large fur trading outposts, trying to get as much fur back to Europe as possible. The demand was so high. and the number one spot between France and Britain, it swapped the lead swapped constantly. Both of these countries hired men to set up new outposts and to traverse the American wilderness, setting up forts and trapping along the way, just trying to dig as deep into the country as possible. Most of the forts and fortifications that they built were usually constructed as close to rivers and bodies of water as possible to make commerce and the transportation of goods as light of a load on the countries as humanly possible. Another thing that was nice about getting these forts set along rivers is it made it easier for the Indians to traverse and to get to them, which they would normally trade. The Indians would give the Englishmen and the French the furs for guns, gunpowder, rum, liquor, iron tools, and the such. And the company that ended up becoming the largest was the Hudson Bay Company, which was headquartered in London. Starting in the year about 1640, a new conflict broke out, which was known as the Beaver Wars, and it ended up starting in 1640 and running all the way to about 1650. The conflict was started by the Iroquois, and they kind of attacked all of the neighboring tribes to the west, trying to create a monopoly for themselves for the fur in that area so that they would have more to trade with the Englishmen. They also needed the land because they had already so depleted their own that they lived on, and they were running out of supplies to trade. All of these conflicts, as well as a new disease that had been introduced to the tribes, otherwise known as smallpox, severely depleted the numbers of natives that lived in these regions. Their numbers were depleted to such an amount that whenever the Iroquois would raid these other tribes, they would actually steal some of the younger members to bring back to help build up their own numbers. In 1667, the Iroquois reached a peace agreement with the French, with the stipulation that all natives who fled to the French during the conflict would be turned back over to the Iroquois. The Iroquois had struggled with the French all throughout the early to mid-1600s. And the reason that the Beaver Wars were so significant is the French had no intentions of allowing the natives to monopolize the beaver market in their own interests. They couldn't have cared less how the natives did, they just wanted their fur. The conflict did not start well for the French. The natives, they blockaded the St. Lawrence River, they stole fur shipments and supply shipments, and they even cut off settlements. In the year 1660, the current-day city of Albany was founded by the Dutch. They named the settlement Beaverwick due to the supreme importance of the fur trade in the town. Around this time, two French fur traders, and forgive me because I am not going to pronounce these names right, I think it's Pierre Esprit and Medard Chouart des Groseilliers.
Médard Chouart des Groseilliers.
And I'll put a pronunciation on the screen. They found a new frozen sea to the north that made getting fur from the northern interior a lot easier and more profitable. Whenever they made it back to France, the French officials actually confiscated all of their fur and cargo because they weren't licensed by the crown to trap. After being turned down and basically robbed by the French, they ended up sailing to London, where they were granted a permit to trap and they were given supplies and two ships to go into the interior and to acquire hides. Their direct success actually led to the creation of the Hudson Bay Company, which was formed on May 2nd, 1670. They were one of the largest, if not the largest, fur company in the world, and they were the oldest company to ever exist. The impact that the Hudson Bay Company had was felt as early as 1671, only a year after their creation by the locals of the region. The natives heard about the constant conflicts that were happening overseas, and they decided that they would become trading middlemen for both sides, helping themselves make more money and guaranteeing the flow of fur to the Europeans. With the English severing trade away from the French, a continuous expansion into the northwest was made to try to win back native trappers. With much of Lake Superior being occupied by the French, diplomatic negotiations with the natives and an aggressive military campaign, the French temporarily halted the competition from the Hudson Bay Company. The French often still had to deal with rogue natives who would try to smuggle furs to the English for the often higher prices and higher quality goods that they could offer them. In the late 1670s, the 5 Indian nations started to raid the Midwest tribes of the Miami and the Illinois. When the native Indian chief, known to the French as the Big Mouth, made a declaration of the reason why they were raiding these other tribes, it was because they had apparently been harvesting their beavers. The French kind of found themselves in an awkward situation because on one hand the conflict helped them because it prevented all of the Indian nations from trading with the English, but they were also afraid that if these tribes were able to take out all the other tribes, there would kind of be a monopoly, and they would be able to demand whatever they wanted for all of these animals. As the Iroquois and the other tribes started to win various battles, the French kind of realized that they needed to step in. So in 1684, French declared war on the Iroquois. The French started their raids, destroying crops and land, and Louis ordered his men to humble the natives and to teach them to respect the grandeur of Great France. The natives, they didn't stand back idly. They ended up raiding back with raids into New France, and the most successful raid being on Lachine in 1689, which killed 24 French, and they took over 80 captives. The superior power with the greater weapons of the French won victory after victory until 1701. They ended up reaching a peace agreement. Over time, the natives and the Indians, they weren't relied on nearly as heavily for the fur trade. With the great distances that Indians were having to travel to English fur posts, it became apparent that there needed to be a change in the tide. So both countries and major companies started hiring voyagers to travel into the land to do the trapping themselves, cutting out the Indians as middlemen. Which brings us into the 1700s, which getting close to the American Revolutionary War, so I just have some numbers here I'm going to read you guys. This is going to kind of give you an idea of what a beaver hide was worth back in the day. So, and these prices are from 1703. Beaver hides were not often sold in this time, but traded. Here's what you could expect to trade one beaver hide for. You could get 2 yards of board fine cotton. You could get 6 knives, 5 pecks of Indian corn, 2 pints of gunpowder, 1 pint of shot, 1 shirt, 2 small axes, or 10 pounds of pork. So that kind of gives you an idea of what their trading value is worth. If you wanted to trade one beaver hide for other hides, you could get the following. So this kind of gives you an idea of what other hides were worth in a variation to a singular beaver hide. So one beaver hide was worth either 1 otter, 8 mink, 1 bear, 4 marten, 5 pounds of feather, 4 raccoon, 2 woodchucks, 2 fox, 4 large seal skins, or half of a moose hide. So beaver was kind of the supreme trading item of the day. With the ending of the 9 Years' War in 1697 and the War of the Spanish Succession in 1713, and with the signing of the Treaty of the Utrecht, France had made substantial concessions. Among the treaty's many provisions, it required France to relinquish all claims to Great Britain on the Hudson Bay, which again became British possession. By the time that the United States was formed as a country, a lot of the country had kind of sort of been mapped out, and the men knew that it was a massive continent, and the greatest majority of west of the Appalachians hadn't really been scouted that hard yet. By the end of the 1700s, the 4 major British trading posts were Fort Niagara in New York, Fort Detroit, Fort Michilimackinac in Michigan, and Grand Portage in Minnesota. They were all kind of located in the Great Lakes region. After the American Revolution, the borders and the boundaries which were set, which were forced by the British to move all of their operations farther north. The United States tried to capitalize off the fur trade as well, with some initial success. But by the 1830s, the fur market had started to decline, and the fur has never yet returned to the same values that we kind of saw at that time. In 1804, President Jefferson sent explorers Lewis and Clark through the Missouri River. They ended up finding the Columbia River and followed it to the Pacific Ocean. Their journey spent over 8,000 miles and opened the West for hundreds of adventurers who had heard the stories of bountiful hunting and trapping in the westward regions. The men who heard the stories, they couldn't have been prepared for the dangers that faced them. These mountain men, as they were often called at the time, just driven by a singular desire to gain wealth and fame from the bountiful fur out west, grew our country at a rapid pace. With the knowledge they passed on about mountain trails and stream passages, they paved the way west for future settlers. Just a few of these mountain men that are well known throughout history, you've probably heard of some of them, were Daniel Boone, Davy Crockett, Kit Carson, Jedediah Smith, and John Astor. The Northwest Company, otherwise known as NWC, was the main rival in the fur trade. The competition led to small-scale skirmishes. One of them was the Pemmican War, which was in 1816, and then the Battle of the Seven Oaks on 19th of June in 1816. And it was the climax of the long dispute. In 1821, the Northwest Company of Montreal and the Hudson's Bay Company were forcibly merged by the British government, and it was an intervention to put an end to the often violent competition. In 1823, the first attempt to commercially produce traps in America was started by a man named Sewell Newhouse. He was the founder of a very beloved collector's trap item that most people know of as Newhouse traps. He started production of a smaller number 1 size trap designed specifically for muskrat and mink in Oneida Castle. It was a village in New York. Sewell was the son of a blacksmith who had taught him the skill of ironwork, and the traits mixed well with his love for the outdoors, and it lended him the ability to make great traps. His first traps were forged from anything he could get his hands on, primarily old scythes, axe heads, files, and any other scraps he could just get his hands on. He also had a knack for trading, and so he would often take his traps to the market, where he would offer them to Indians in exchange for their valuable furs. When the religious organization of the Oneida community purchased part of the Oneida Indian Reservation, Sewell became a convert, and the entire community began manufacturing traps. When the trade would slow down in New York, members of the community would take traps to Chicago, which started the trap distribution all around the world. Around 1830, the price of beaver felt, along with other fur bearers, fell due to the competition from the silk market. More specifically, there was an increase in demand of silk hats, which had hurt the demand for beaver felt hats. Only a decade later, the beaver era was over. In 1854, a machine shop moved from Newark, New Jersey to the Oneida community, and a mass production of steel traps began. After John Hutchinson joined Sewell Newhouse, they began designing and building larger varieties of traps, including 1.5s, 2s for fox, and number 3 for otter, and number 4 for beaver, and even larger traps like number 5 for bear. Newhouse's small beginning has developed into a major company today known as Animal Trap Company of America, owned by the Woodstream Corp. You probably know them as the company that makes Victor mouse traps. We're going to move all the way to 1977. A small fur buying company named Sterling Fur, and a lot of you guys have probably heard of them, especially if you live kind of in the area that we're at. Named after the town that it resides nearby, was founded by a man named Keith Winkler in a building known as the Old Milk Barn. Keith still runs it to this day. It's been 47 years, and Sterling has grown into one of the largest trapping supply wholesalers in America. Only a year later, in 1978, a company that you may know of as Minnesota Trapline Products was founded by Tim and Nancy Cavens. Their line of Cavens lures and baits has become an industry staple, with almost every single dealer currently carrying what they make. They're also super well known for their MB line of traps, which forever was known as the gold standard of traps that you could use on your line. And honestly, it was until just recently that they've kind of have started to be pushed out of that first place spot by another company that we'll go over here just shortly. And Minnesota brand still makes top-notch traps. Just 46 years later, they've grown into the largest trapping supply retailer in America. Fur Harvesters Auction was formed in 1991, and that's located in North Bay, Ontario. It's owned and operated equally between Indigenous as well as non-Indigenous trappers, and it's currently the largest fur auction house in North America. The Hudson Bay Company, which we talked a lot about a little bit ago, it ended up spinning off the fur auction portion of its company in 1992. The name of the spinoff was NAFA, or North American Fur Auctions. NAFA, just like Fur Harvesters, was a fur consignment auction house that prided itself on getting trappers the best return on their fur as possible. And they were the oldest fur business in the world and one of the longest standing companies on the planet until 2018, whenever they filed for bankruptcy. In its May 2008 auction, NAFA handled 3.5 million pelts. In 1993, there was another trapping supply dealer that was created. The name of the company, a lot of you know it as Murray's Lures. It was created by Don Murray in Newark, West Virginia. And with lots of hard work and dedication, he built it into a large-scale operation. And in 2005, the trapping supply company was taken over by his cousin Mike. Murray's Lures has grown into a major player in the trapping supply industry, and they really pride themselves on offering quality items and some of the top customer service around. The same year that Mike took over the company from his cousin, another trapping supply dealer was started. The name of the company is Windy Ridge Trapper. It was founded by Jason Stutler in a shack behind his house in Rockport, West Virginia. Modern fur trapping and trading in North America is still fairly large, and it's a part of a $15 billion global fur industry where wild animal pelts make up over 15% of total fur output. In 2008, the global recession hit the fur industry really hard, and trappers especially hard, with the great depressed fur prices thanks to the drop in the sales of expensive fur coats and hats. And such a drop in the fur prices reflects trends of previous economic downturns, and it just really hasn't came back super hard since then. In 2013, the NAFIC group, otherwise known as The Truth About Fur, was established to help disseminate false information on the internet and to try to educate people on what the fur market's really about and what trappers are really about. Beaver did eventually see a rise in value in 2023 whenever the public desire for cowboy hats returned. If you didn't know, cowboy hats are primarily made of one of two things, either chinchilla fur or beaver felt. This rise in popularity in cowboy hats is much attributed to the popularity of the hit TV show Yellowstone, and everyone wanted to be a cowboy. Even though the beaver market has depressed a little bit over the past couple of years, and we don't really know where the market's going to go, there's a couple of things that we do know. Trapping is still a major part of American and the world economics. Trapping's not going away. The fur trade is still very alive. And in fact, beavers did help build America. If you enjoyed this video, leave us a comment and let us know how you felt about it and if there's any particular topics that you'd like to hear about next. The last video we did there a couple weeks ago about the current state of the fur market and what current fur prices are, we had a lot of comments, and we had people from all over America that kind of told us where they were from. So if you want to do that again, that'd be awesome. I think right now Ohio and Pennsylvania had the most people, so we'll see if any other states pop up more than they did. But we really appreciate you guys. If you like the video, give us a thumbs up. Consider subscribing for more future content. Have a blessed day. See you later.